You commented on this. Special Ed, who I recently interviewed, who actually was my first hip hop interview ever in life. In 2002, I went to his house. I interviewed him for a book that never came out. On Drink Champs, he said that NWA brought destruction to hip hop.
And that's when I hear stuff like that, I watch people go, well, we say nigga in hip hop all the time, and that's why they say it. Nigga's been the American lexicon since the early 1700s. Hip hop been around since 1975. What came first, nigga or the Sugar Hill Gang? Like Mark
clearly
Twain
the N-word was around way before. The
problems that have existed in our communities have existed for decades. Illustrating them and talking about them gave somebody an excuse, but it didn't create them. It didn't make them exist. I think that we have a problem all the time when we blame, kill the messenger and not the message. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't people who were. I heard somebody say this is the craziest shit in the world to me. Now people believe, well, we are violent in America because we have Grand Theft Auto and because we have, Grand Theft Auto is making people more violent, right? In America, it says. Or movies are making people. Well, they show those same movies and play those same games everywhere else, right? Why is it here that they're more violent? Why is it that they're mentally ill people all over the world? Why is it here that they're more violent? It is because they have the tools to express their violence. If Grand Theft Auto makes us violent, then that must mean Pac-Man made us fat, right?
Well, look, I talked to Special Ed about this. Number one, he said that his comments were directed to N.W.A. And he spoke to the various N.W.A. members about this. He spoke to Ice Cube about this. I think he spoke to Yella about this and so forth. And what he said, like with Ice Cube said, look, when they first created these songs, it was just local. And it was almost parody of what was happening in their neighborhood. They didn't expect it to get as big as it got.
I did have a discussion with Cube, and he understands where I'm coming from, and I understand where he's coming from. They say that they were just making, I wouldn't say parody, but records for the hood, selling out the trunk. It wasn't intended for global scale marketing, but that's where it was taken.
Well, I mean, listen, the original records is true, but Straight Outta Compton was a major release that went number
Afterwards.
one. Everyone knew by the time. Straight Outta Compton was so eagerly anticipated by hip hop fans that you can't say this is out the trunk anymore.
Right. Well, they have to take some accountability, but at the end of the day now, once again, we go back to the labels. Now, it comes to a point where the labels are paying artists to emulate this, paying the artists in this genre, paying the artists to send these messages out, to continue, because they did see the effect that it had, just like they saw the effect that empowerment of the conscious music had.
But, for example, and I spoke to him about this, when you look at people like Alonzo from the World Class Wrecking,
right,
who was there,
and I used to go
at Ground Zero.
I used to go to Eve at the Dark, where I used to walk from my house and go to Eve at the Dark.
So what he told me, now this is firsthand accounts. This is not me and you, well, me especially talking from the outside looking in, because I didn't grow up in LA. He said like this. He said, look, before NWA came out, he used to throw parties like this Eve After Dark that you're talking about, right?
Jesse's Eve at the Dark.
Exactly.
I used to walk there all the time.
He was a big promoter, along with being a musician in the World Class Wrecking Crew, right? That was his group. And Dr. Dre and Yella were in that group. He said when he was throwing parties before NWA, there was a couple of gangsters that would show up and sometimes there'd be a problem and everything else like that. But after NWA became uber popular, these shows would be like 70, 80% gangster. Like constantly, there was constant violence. They popularized it to such a point where everyone wanted to emulate them. And with the emulation, more violence came.
When you look at the effects that NWA had in terms of gangster rap, not only affecting the music, but also affecting the communities and so forth. But what do you think about it?
Well, I'm going to tell you a little story. When I first got into the club business, 1979, now, first of all, gangs have been around forever in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Gangs had different reasons for existence. Some gangs started off to fight white people. Some gangs were designed to fight the police in the community, because what we're experiencing right now is nothing new. It's just being televised more. So the ratio of gangbangers to civilians was minuscule in the early 70s and early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, okay? Right after N.W.A. Now, I've been in the club business all this time, and I stopped making records. Went back to my second career, which is nightclub owner. What happened was N.W.A. and gangster rap made gangster lifestyle cool. So the ratio started to change. Everybody was a gangbanger. It used to be 5% gangbanger, okay? Because gangbangers, once upon a time, had a code. You just couldn't have a gun. You had to be able to fight. You had to have something to bring to the hood other than a pistol. Well, at some point in time, when the dope and the gangbanging became profitable, everybody became a gangbanger. So now you got 95% gangsters or 90% gangsters and 10% civilians. And when that happened, everything went crazy, because now theaters, clubs, parking lots, the park, everything is a war zone.
I don't think you could completely deny it. I don't think you could completely say
But it's
that
cause
it
and
did,
effect.
especially in LA, had some level of a domino effect where people wanted to be like that. In the same way that you could say that Colors introduced the world to Crips and Bloods, and now you have this Crip and
I
Blood thing all
disagree.
over the world.
I think it
Okay,
gave
we
them
can
and
disagree.
I'll tell
I
you-
respect your opinion.
I'll tell you why.
Okay.
What exacerbated gang violence in LA wasn't Colors, and it wasn't NWA. There was a proposition that passed called Proposition 13. And what Proposition 13 did was took and attached all the money that was allocated to a place by property taxes. When those property taxes were, so they took summer school programs out, they took after school programs out, they took busing out. So you took all that away, and then 5 to 7 years later, you had this spike in crime. Now, you could say it was NWA, or you could say that it was a world-class wrecking crew, or I could say...
Well, World Class Recruit was never a gangster group.
but I'm saying
Yeah.
you could say that it was it was gangster, or it was a legislative, short-sighted thing that took resources out and that manifested itself in a way. California had to pass a law that said that now, prisoners had to get $8,000 worth of medical. And what happened? They let 20,000 people go. So I do not believe for 1 minute it was the art that started it. I think it was legislation that devoided a community. And I'm a pretty bright dude. You know why I stopped going to school? They took the buses out of my schools. I had to walk through it was like fucking Colors. I had to walk through the Shotgun and the Payback and the Raymonds to get to fucking school. By the time like all the real niggas got kicked out, and by the time I was finished, I was walking to schools with niggas that play oboe. The band members were there. So what happened?
Listen,
it's not.
I understand that part, and I'm fully in agreement with you in that regard. But you can't deny that NWA romanticized LA.
I will not deny
gangster
that at all.
culture to the whole point, to the whole world, because this was, although Ice-T was around before, 6 a.m. was not Straight Outta Compton or Fuck the Police. Not on that caliber. It just wasn't.
But why
they became a worldwide phenomenon, and a lot of people started to want to be like that
because of the experiences they were having, because of the resources that were taken from them. They didn't start talking about things that wasn't happening.
Right, but I'm saying that the level of popularization of that group influenced a lot of young men and women, but mostly men.
You could say the same thing about jazz. You could say the same thing about...
Jazz is not talking about, does not have violent imagery all throughout the music. Jazz, no.
A lot of drug addicts, a lot of drug use.
No, there was drug addicts that happened. The artists became drug addicts, but the drugs were not pushed in the music. It was mostly instrumental music.
I think that when we're talking about cause and effect, we always look at the effect, but not the cause. The effect was what NWA did. The
Okay,
cause
fair enough.
was legislation. California people forget this. California was Texas 25 years ago. It was Texas. This three strikes law. Where they took affirmative action out of colleges and universities.
Yeah, I remember.
Being hard on immigrants. That's Texas.
Yeah.
You would never see that now.
Yeah.
What happened was an influx of immigrants. We always look at the effect and never the cause. Why is it? You know, at one point in California, they had more prisons, more young people in prison than any other country in the world. It was so bad that I had to apologize to Kamala Harris because I disliked, like I'd been fond of her, but I associated her with what I'd seen in California and the fact that she was different than I had accused her of being made me have to apologize to her. Yes, it was NWA romanticized a thing, or I think they were telling their experiences and people put a romantic connection to it.
Correct.
But it came from somewhere.